Oh wait, is he here?
That should be on.
Okay, yeah.
Pleased to convene and call to order this agendized meeting of the City of Sonoma Climate Action Commission. I believe the first step will be a roll call of the commissioners present this evening at this time. Natalie?
Commissioner Clemons? Here. Commissioner Ward? Here. Commissioner NICHOL?
Here.
Vice Chair Conlon?
Here.
Chair Morrell?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on tonight's agenda involves public participation using Zoom. We have had important public participation in previous commission meetings. However, I've been notified by City Council staff to read the following notice about continuing public participation to prevent disruptions from individuals making comments not pertaining to city business. The City of Sonoma has temporarily suspended public comment via Zoom for all its upcoming meetings. Individuals who wish to provide public comments can do so, and indeed this commission encourages them to do so, by attending meetings in person at the City Council chambers where the meeting is taking place, or by submitting a written comment via email to publiccomment@sonomacity.org, or by using the public portal available on the city's website, cityofsonoma.gov. For more information about this topic, please contact directly City Clerk Rebecca Barr. Thank you. Okay, and we would normally, we're going to go now to the approval of tonight's agenda. I believe all commissioners should have the agenda both electronically before this meeting and in front of them this evening. So I would call for any discussion of the agenda, or if there is none, for a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Tom?
Quick question. Am I correct in seeing that there's no meeting minutes on tonight's agenda?
Could you use the microphone so I can hear you then?
Thank you, Alan. I'm sorry. Are there no meeting minutes on tonight's agenda? Is that an oversight, or is that just because they haven't been produced, or were they approved at a previous meeting?
It's an oversight.
Good point, Vice Chair Conlon. Tom, thank you. Given that, Ms. Gates, how would we proceed? We'll just do those 2 sets of minutes next time? Got it. Okay.
Thank you.
That's clear, and thanks for catching that, Tom. Now, for any
that,
other
then I'll-
elements of the agenda.
With that, then I'll make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Thank you for the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Motion and second. Is there any discussion of said motion?
I don't think so.
Hearing
Speak the motion again.
the motion is to approve the agenda for the night's meeting
Oh, okay.
as should be in front of you, Ellen. So any discussion of the motion as presented? If not, I believe we could go to a roll call vote.
Commissioner Ward?
Aye.
Commissioner NICHOL?
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon?
Yes.
Chair Morrell?
Yes, aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
The tonight's agenda. Comments from the public is normally read. Since we're not having Zoom comments and because I don't observe any public, I believe we can move past the reading of this particular guidance as to the 3-minute rule and so on. Is there any commission objection to my not reading the entire process for the invisible public? Hearing none, I'm going to move on to item 2, items for discussion. The first is to select the chair and vice chair. As I understand, this is an annual process that all the commissions go through. And the structure is that the vice chair would take charge of the motion and discussion. So I'm delegating now to the vice chair this important procedure.
Thank you, Commissioner, Chair Morrell. So we're going to talk, I guess, about who would be, whether we want to keep David in the position of chair for this next year, or if we want to have another nominee for that role. Do we have any comments from the commissioners?
I think our current chair is doing a very fine job, and I'd be happy to see him continue if he wished to do so. Or perhaps a lady would be nice too, if she was agreeable to that.
As I am chairing this section here, I'll wait for any further comments from the rest of my commissioners.
Oh, I also think that David's been doing a good job as chair, and I would like to see him as chair next year as well if he would like to be.
I'm also amenable to that.
Very well then. Seeing that we have, congratulations, David. You
Well,
do have good
I
support.
would be
so I'll be
pleased to
entertaining a motion.
respond to the comments I've heard, that yes, I would be eligible for continuing for one more year.
Very well then, and I will entertain a motion from my commissioners.
I so move.
I will second.
Any discussion, further discussion? Then I'll ask for the vote.
You know, it's very comforting to have him to be leading the meeting. I enjoy it.
I just want to note that we would normally call for public comment at this time. However, there are no members of the public present.
Am I required to physically excuse myself from this? As recuse would be the word, as well
Recuse.
as excuse.
Ready to vote? Commissioner Ward,
Aye.
Commissioner Nichol,
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, team. I'm now pleased to, moving us ahead for another year, to call for any nominations for the vice chair of this important Climate Action Commission, with the emphasis on the word action.
I'm happy to keep it steady if everybody else is.
Me too.
I'm amenable to continuing in this vice chair role.
Excellent. I believe we can have any further discussion of, we need an official motion.
I move to continue with Vice Chair Conlon as Vice Chair.
Is there a second to said motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Alan. Is there any discussion? I would then call for the roll call vote on this motion having been seconded.
Commissioner Ward,
Aye.
Commissioner Nichol.
Aye.
Thank you. Chair Morrell,
Aye.
the motion passes unanimously.
Very good. We've taken care of the annual business. Public comment, comments by the commission, and vote. All right, the next step this evening is a little more substantive, or not that that wasn't terribly substantive, but here we go. To prioritize our strategies that have now been approved by the City Council. As we all know, we struggled for some time to get a document done. We've got it done. It's been to the council. The council not only has approved, but in my personal conversations with several members, they seem pleased with where we are and the apparent speed with which we're now moving after some time of the city of Sonoma kind of struggling with this issue. So tonight we want to talk a little more about our priorities. Once again, in using the term of the Climate Action Commission, I stress the word action, and it's now time to begin to take actions along our priority list. That involves people doing things, including the citizens, including the officials of City Hall, and of course it will involve some budget issues that will be a continuing challenge, both city budget and potentially grants that can support certain activities that we might pick the pocket of the state or federal or county or foundations as we move forward with our action strategies. So I think we have in front of each commissioner, staff has prepared, and my glasses are going on, a summary of what's been in our longer strategy of the various action items with target years between 2023, 24, and 25, maybe out to 26 on some. And the idea tonight, the ones in blue in italics under the column action are the ones we have previously highlighted for action. I would propose the following approach, that we look at each of those quickly, the blue italic ones, to be sure we still agree that those are our highest, and then come back to discuss them quickly but individually as to a sense of priority, and maybe any thoughts on how we begin to take action in those categories. Not that we'll take hours to do this, but I'd like to move consecutively if that meets the approval of my colleagues.
I would like to say that there's a kind of a new thing that's come on the horizon, and that is that there's a SMART has a $500,000 study to get SMART to Weinberg. And I think that we should make an effort to connect with SMART at that point. And of course, as you know, I've talked in the past, is I believe that a streetcar is the best way to go, particularly with the federal program that will pay for all costs.
That's certainly an item that we can get to. I'd like to go through the agenda item first officially,
Okay.
and then come back to the new information about the SMART train and the possibility of a parking area down in the Shellville area
Yeah.
that might be
We've
used
discussed
for an
before.
electric
Yeah.
shuttle of one kind or
Yeah.
another.
Yeah.
And it might be that we move consecutively from a traditional bus to an electric bus to a train at some point over the years, but that we look at the whole broader issue of climate smart Sonoma in this context, Alan. So my proposal is to kind of go quickly through the blue items, if that works, and then back to sort of identify which ones we really want to move on. Tom?
So that sounds great, but I'd like to maybe make some preliminary contextualizing comments. Just to, the plan has been sort of around for a long time in its various versions. And since it was first conceived, there have been some significant developments at the state and regional level that we should kind of be aware of, I think, as we begin our prioritization discussion. So I would just, first of all, bring to mind, I had the benefit of a conversation with Michael Boswell, who's a professor at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, who's written a book on climate action planning. It's in its second edition now. And he's been studying with a team of grad students and another professor all the plans that have been submitted around the state to date in climate action. And after describing that research, he came up with 5 shorthand recommendations that he encourages all local governments to at least be aware of. These are his best guesses as things to prioritize. One is to join a community choice aggregation district. Fortunately, we already have that in Sonoma County. We were the second one in the state. 2 is to pass a new construction all-electric REACH code, effectively banning the installation of natural gas in new buildings. There's no point in investing in gas infrastructure when we know we have to phase it out. That's on our list, I noticed. 3 is to allocate money for existing building decarbonization, specifically in the single-family residential sector, because in Sonoma in particular, we have lots of single-family residential. And that also requires education and probably incentives or other subsidies to encourage people who can't afford to invest in their property to actually do so. So it's existing building decarbonization. The fourth one is to allocate money for bicycle, pedestrian, transit, and EV infrastructure. And then the final one is to build collaborative partnerships to get things done. And his final comment on that was, show me a city's budget and I'll tell you what that city values. So I've been thinking about that, and I also look at the statewide scoping study. The Air Resources Board, every, I think it's 5 years, maybe it's only 3 years, I keep these reports straight, issues the scoping plan on how we're going to meet the state's aggressive climate goals. And there is an appendix that identifies the top things that local government should work on. And because transportation is such a big share, and because local governments have jurisdiction over roads, bike lanes, transit investments, things like that, local governments are in kind of a unique position to assert themselves to facilitate decarbonization of the transportation sector. We can't do much about some of the other things, but we can there. And so I just wanted to get everybody sort of thinking about those things. We know in transportation that there is going to be electrification of our light duty and medium and heavy duty vehicle fleets. But we also know we have to reduce vehicle miles traveled. The goal is 19% below 2005 by 2035. 19% reduction. And I would just point out one last thing, if you persist, if you can endure a little more lecture from me, in that the Regional Climate Protection Authority has done an update to the travel behavior study. And vehicle miles traveled in Sonoma County has actually declined 4.2% from 2017 to 2022. So this is post the real bottom of the pandemic impact. We are still, our vehicle miles traveled is down, and we believe that's probably because people did switch to working from home more. They go in less days a week than they may have done before, but also because fires and other, we have fewer people living in the county too. So I just wanted people to have those sort of big picture things in mind as we go into our specific list and think how our list might connect up with those other things. Thanks for that indulgence there.
Oh, it's a pleasure to hear it, and those are very, very important points. The building electrification issue, including potential incentives for solar systems, both on individual homes, and I'm intrigued with cul-de-sac sharing that can drive down some of the economic costs with the state changes that have fewer incentives for individual homeowners for solar is important. Transportation and VMT, very important in my view, obviously, with some incentives and sanctions. It gets us into parking and parking management. It gets us into thinking about hotels, both existing and new hotels, and how people get there and so on. One other broad point I would make before we get into the individual pieces of our action items is public involvement. In my view, this is not fundamentally going to be achieved by city government action on its own. The government is too small. It's too involved in lots of other priorities. It's going to take what I call 10,000 actors, that is the residents of the city, including high school students and younger students and older folks and so on, getting involved. And so public involvement, effective involvement, becomes crucial throughout all these measures. Are there any other general comments commissioners would like to make before we start to get into the specifics this evening and move things along on Valentine's night? Hearing none, I think let's just go through the quick list of the blue italicized items, starting with the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, and see if there are any comments on any of these before their significance, what we'll do before we sort of focus in on detail.
I think the one thing I was looking at too is that we're trying to present this for fiscal year 2024 to 2025 for the council. And so I don't know if we want to think about it as prioritizing. The reason I think of this right now with that one is that it is a target year of 2025. So I don't know if we want to really think in nitty gritty of, we have items that have a shorter term target year at this point that are priorities for us. So I don't know if we want to make sure that those kind of top our list too, which does feel like a bummer when we know that transportation is the hugest thing and our first three priorities are all outside the fiscal year target.
Well, that may be, but target year doesn't mean we do nothing until we get towards that year. What would we want to be doing potentially in 2024 with respect to these issues, including public involvement, some budget from the city to begin to move these things, interface with some of the other city actions like the parking study that's underway. There's a variety of things we can do.
That's where I was going to go. So
Yeah.
I would make a friendly amendment to what you're proposing, because some of these items may not be blue, but they're kind of all grouped together, right? They're related to each other. And so I have more to add, like this is obviously just a little snapshot. So if we go through each one in the order, you'll see as we go through which ones that you guys identified as priority. But I can kind of talk to why maybe that year is not necessarily right this second. And then as we go through, kind of highlight, and you guys can talk about, okay, do we want to bump that up? I also would recommend that we identify if this is a committee item that can help, the committee can help, or if staff needs to lead. As we go through each one, and then which ones we're going to need, obviously, funding for.
Right, and some of it may be ad hoc, where we link to other commissions that have been meeting jointly, where they're involved.
When we get to the trees,
for
we'll get
example.
there, yeah.
But some of the others may also involve that as the general plan amendment process proceeds in the Planning Commission in a possible ad hoc with our Climate Action Commission. So that's another option. So what I think Jennifer's suggesting is we don't focus only on the blue italicized, but go through the entire list and kind of
Yeah, because they're
through.
connected.
Yes, of course. Yes, Tom?
If, I'm curious to have kind of a dialogue with staff tonight about how we can kind of bring this all together. And because the target year dates are a little, they were illustrative, I think, at the time, but now that there's a little more of a sense of what the council's priorities are, what may be feasible in the near term for the budget process, as Amber mentioned, we really do need to be sort of prioritizing this year and then what is going to get pushed off in the future. This is a great large document, but we need to prioritize it. So I'm curious to ask the question of staff. How do you see the transportation priorities in particular playing out over the next year? And is there support for what you already have in process that we could be giving at the commission? Or are there things on this list that are, because I know there's integration between the bicycle parking and the plaza and.
So why don't we go one by
planning.
one?
So
Let's just go ahead and start one by one. We'll go through each one. I'll highlight some things and identify why the year, and then we can just, if we're good to go, that's committee, and my recommendation, whether it's committee or staff. And then if we're good, we can move on to the next one, or if we want to have more discussion on it, we can. How does that
I think
sound?
that's
Thank you.
great, particularly with the small group this evening and limited public involvement, we can have a conversation. We don't know who's on
Right.
the internet, but we
Sure.
welcome them if they're there. So that sounds good. So staff comments on item T1, let's call it alpha, with respect to the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure topic.
Sure. So the preparing the master plan to improve and expand our bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. So right now, as you all know, we're doing the active transportation plan, and we're also updating our circulation element in the general plan. Both of those documents, crossing our fingers, will be adopted in 2025, hence the 2025 date. And then we can begin planning infrastructure in the broader sense around those improvements that we're looking to do, and also with the new guidance from the policy around that. That's the 2020, why that one was identified as 2025. I will bring up the downtown bicycle parking. That is 2023. We have purchased bicycle parking that we will be installing in the plaza probably this quarter. So that will be starting up, and we have a couple of extras that we would be looking to install outside of what I would call the garden plaza, and do into the commercials areas and do some little pilots in those areas. So that's the beginning of infrastructure in my mind, but we're doing it in that sense of piecemeal. So we have some funds that we had identified. We purchased them. Now we just need to install them.
And through the chair, my understanding was that the county was engaged in a countywide transportation study. And did we get anything out of that process to date, or is that just outside the city's?
They will be coming to Planning Commission I'd have to look again. I want to say April. I have a meeting with them to discuss what they heard from all their feedback that they received. And so we'll move forward with that once we get those comments. And so that's the active transportation plan. That's the county's. And that's going to be a bicycle and pedestrian plan. So where do we need to make those connections, and where do we have sidewalk gaps, things like that. And then we typically take that and incorporate it into our general plan circulation element.
Okay, so they're not doing any study of anything inside the jurisdiction of the city, or they are?
Yes.
Oh, they are. So they're going to
Yeah.
be making some recommendations that, based on their first pass through here, there will be some. So there's, in some sense, that's actually in process already, and that's what I had thought was our intention in the ad hoc, and so I'm glad to hear that that's actually playing out. So, thank you.
And that would include the second one, which is connect the Sonoma City Trail to the plaza. So that's one of the things that I'm closely looking at, is how do we get the north-south connections better to the trail in general. And so working through that. And so once I actually have that draft, I'll make sure that you guys are all aware of that.
And for the benefit of my other commissioners, at the general plan public outreach meeting that I attended a couple of weeks ago, there was a lot of conversation about how great the crosstown east-west bike path is, but and the third Nathanson Creek and Friar Creek paths, but there's a gap there for the bike lanes, and so people are aware of those needs to get. I mean, we have an amazingly bikeable city with just a few gaps. So, thank you.
There's some very interesting citizen action in this category. A woman named Cedra Nathan has been actively exploring corridors. She has a very detailed map of the entire city with each parcel showing and potential links between these, and she's working heavily on that, which I greatly encourage in terms of the kind of work to create green corridors, both bicycle and pedestrian, and to identify where the gaps are, and to see how and when and who can get them filled. So it's an example of the kind of citizen action I'm certainly encouraging.
So with the T1, for the most part, except for the creek cool corridors, it's kind of in a let's participate in the process as it continues through. The dates are more about, okay, so we're continuing to participate and develop, and then the dates are more about, all right, now implementation. So now we're going to move forward with what does that look like on the ground and the action side of what we all enjoy. On the Create Cool Corridors, Travis had done this before he had left. He had already started looking into this and had a draft going. So that's something that I would recommend that we continue to look at and identify that funding again for this next year. So that's the 2024, so that's this fiscal year, but understanding what the grant needs are, and so what's that match would be required, if any.
And the cool corridors could be enhanced by tree planting, which we'll come to when we get back into more on the trees discussion. There's a great deal of excitement and a fair amount of motion forward in the trees when we get to that in the sequence here. Are there any other comments on T1 before we sort of move on?
I had one more,
Yes,
if
sir.
you may. So with the scoping study at the state level putting so much emphasis on parking strategies, and knowing that the city has embarked on the first phase of parking improvements in the downtown area, I'm wondering if there's any budgetary considerations this year in that particular area. I know that bike and ped infrastructure and downtown bike parking are on our list here, but is there any way for us to accelerate that phase 2 of that process? And if not, then that's fine, but I just have to ask the question.
So I can't remember if it was this year or next year. I'll go back with, well, after we actually implement the change, then to go back and say, okay, did this work or not, and do another study. So we're looking at a couple of years out before I can say whether it worked or not, because that was the impetus to do phase 2, was whether or not phase 1 worked.
And that makes sense. I'm wondering if there, just being brainstorming since we are tonight, if there's any need for a consultant that would speed that process up, but it doesn't sound like we can do that. So thank you.
Okay, on to T2, increase EV charging at multi-family unit dwellings, and to expand the publicly accessible EV charging. So when I say 2026, I recognize that things may come up as being available for funding sources or opportunities to participate in, especially the publicly accessible. So 2026 being the goal for implementation for actually like installation of EV charging is what that 2026 is. If there are funding mechanisms that, and so I'm going to actually recommend that you guys form an ad hoc committee to help find grants. I don't have that time. And you guys are all in that world that you may already see them. That's when we kind of need to know. And then again, the match situation as they come up. So start looking now. If they're an annual grant that comes up, then we're ready to, apply in 2025 with the next funding cycle. Or we look now and put it as part of a potential, grant. And this actually not only does this section on T2, but it also does the government operations. So there's like twofold. So when we talk about government operations, a lot of that is we already talk about throughout this document. So I don't think of them as something separate, by the way.
I'm intrigued with the possibility of an ad hoc on grants that would cut across all of these programs.
Yeah.
With the authority to sort of interact with the partnerships that we discussed a little while ago as well, with some of the existing groups that are available to consider for partnering on grant management. It's and one thing else, and some of you have heard me on this, maybe even all of you have heard me on this before. My experience in the last 18 months or so is that much of the grant opportunity lies in communities that are identified as disadvantaged in one way or other. The city of Sonoma within our boundaries doesn't play quite as well in that game. So I'm eager to see us jointly work with elements of the county in the Springs community, or partnering groups that are working in the Springs from La Luz to others, in ways in which the city could get more access to federal and state monies that are disadvantaged driven. This includes CAL FIRE and others with which I'm working, and for example, got CAL FIRE to agree that Sonoma Valley High School campus can be considered a disadvantaged community for purposes of some tree planting that's already budgeted and funded for a project. And I was pleased, and I got it on an email in writing from the key CAL FIRE director, so we're ready to go. But the more we can consider partnering with other groups that bring us that disadvantaged access, the better we're going to be on our grant making.
I'll reiterate my question from the previous section on whether this is an area where, instead of just an ad hoc relying on volunteer effort, if maybe it would be worth the city's effort to invest in a grant writing and somebody to help on that in this near term. I have a sense that the window right now for federal stimulus money, subsidy money, is like there's a pipe opening up right now. I'm aware of the EPA has awarded, I think, 9 MSAs in California, or some planning districts in California, to submit by like tomorrow or the end of the week priority climate action plans that will then be detailed, and BayREN is putting one together for the Bay Area. I know that the County of Napa received a presentation from BayREN, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, I stand corrected, is helping convene this. But I haven't heard anything about it in Sonoma County. So somebody else who's a little more tapped into these funds might be, if we don't have people at those tables, we're not going to be getting the money. So I'm just wondering if this is an area where the council might want us to be a little more aggressive about looking for funds in the near term.
We can always present that idea. I mean, obviously it's not within our strategies, but it's, something that's needed citywide, and put that forward, and see where it lands. But in the meantime, it doesn't hurt to recognize these. Now, the bigger grants, the big Sonoma County RCPA going after something is a little different, but I'm sitting on that one now. I'm sitting on all of them, so I'm learning a lot.
Well, one example is that the Sonoma Ecology Center over the past year, jointly with La Luz, was able to get roughly $1 million out of US EPA and on an EJ, Environmental Justice grant for resilient vegetation management work. So that's the kind of example of what we can do as a city climate action group, the commission plus whoever else we can get working with us, like Rotary Club and so on. But getting these grants, I agree with Tom that the window is right now for, I've learned to love him, call them Uncle Ira and Uncle Bill. That's the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. Uncle Ira and Uncle Bill are available now, and there's a fair amount of money out there, and we need to be organized to deal with it. So sometime tonight, when it's appropriate in timing, we should be talking about who's on an ad hoc and what we need to do to form it officially under all the charms of the Brown Act.
Yeah. Let's get through our list and we'll get right there.
Yep.
All right.
I would add on EVs some of my thoughts. I would like to see us push for making sure that the EV chargers we do have are working, and perhaps an ad hoc or particular commissioner might be assigned to sort of explore whether they're working. The ones at the Bank of America aren't always working, for example. They're the ones I know most about. There are also two with the Tesla chargers that are not Tesla, that the signage has been removed from them recently. So it looks as if they too are only Tesla when they're not. Those are the two furthest from Napa Street East. So those are the kinds of issues on available EV chargers that we could be working on with a team that has that as an action item.
Okay.
Okay?
Go on to the next one. So T3, improve public transportation. Alan's favorite, the electric powered downtown shuttle. And we talked a little bit about that. We are looking at 2025 as to start looking at that. I would say that it's probably sooner because it's in phase 1 of the parking management plan. I don't know what that looks like yet. Obviously, we support moving forward with the study because it needs to be studied. And so that would be the first step.
I would think we could be more aggressive in this category on a starting point with a federal or state grant to be looked at. I would think the first piece would be vehicle and driver costing, an electric vehicle and a driver focused on weekends and weekends and holidays using the high school parking lot to shuttle tourists to the plaza and around to some of the nearby wineries. This could be a really excellent grant proposal.
Well, you know, the problem is that with the public transportation is that the buses that we have right now are for people who don't have cars. And the big challenge is to get people who do have cars to start using a system that is pleasing to them and that can get them around the community. And there are funds for this, and I think that this is something that we should be exploring more aggressively.
I would agree that I'd like to see this looked at in 2024, not postponed to 2025. I'm looking at tourist parking on weekends at a free parking lot with solar electric added at the high school with an electric shuttle that would take them around as a way to link to parking decisions made at the plaza itself and sending the right signal that we expect tourists to lessen their total VMT loadings.
As always, it comes down to money.
Indeed, and that's where I think a team looking at a grant application would be a high priority there.
Yeah, I'm just keeping a track as we go through this long list of which things we think are most grant fundable in the city of Sonoma. Because David, you mentioned that we may have some lower criteria because of our economic viability here, and that might make us not the greatest candidate. So that having the grant experts weigh in on this might be more valuable than our own hunches at this stage. So I'm going to just, I think you're right. The conversation today is right that EV chargers and a shuttle are both potentially grant fundable.
One question I have is this new hydrogen that they've discovered. Are you familiar with this vast resources of hydrogen buried in the ground? And with this is a perfect fuel. And is this something that is going to be, I hear very little about transformation into the hydrogen economy. And I heard it before but with people who were lunatics about it, but now it looks like it could be a real thing. So does anybody have any comments about that?
Tom, you want to start?
I'm not aware of vast quantities of hydrogen in the ground, but I'm intrigued.
Well, there's certainly a lot of talk and an increasing amount of research about the making of hydrogen. So there's green hydrogen, and then there's hydrogen associated more with natural gas. operations, which is a good deal less green. All of that becomes more in the future. There is one hydrogen demonstration facility here in the Sonoma Valley with Mac McQuan's operation.
Where is that?
Stone Edge Farm.
There's the name, Stone Edge Farm, Mac McQuan's operation. It has a hydrogen system operational. You can visit it. My thought about grant funding for the for an electric EV with it is less to do at this point with the disadvantaged communities in the springs than it is with linking it to climate smart tourism. There's a great deal of interest in climate smart tourist agendas, and that's where I think that grant would be pitched initially. So it would be particularly focused on tourists coming into town.
Okay.
And we're ready to go to T4.
Well, I'm just going to comment real quick on the expand the 32 Sonoma shuttle. That'll be a staff / council
Yeah.
member, request, and to see what they need to know in order to even consider it. On T4 and T5 to
Just a
explore.
quick comment on that one.
Sure.
Just point out that a community member here, Jennifer Palladini, who's been active in climate, was principal in the Sonoma Valley Climate Coalition many years ago, put in a personal request to the county transportation and was successful in getting a new bus line added because of the great analysis that she'd done demonstrating that there would be ridership. And this is to the Credo School. So it's now possible for students in Sonoma Valley to get to high school in Credo. So we can do this if we step up
It's
to
an
do it.
excellent example, and she was also very aggressive and successful in getting people to write letters in support, which is another piece of the puzzle to make it happen. I know because I wrote one of those letters.
Okay, and then T4 and T5 are the ordinances, to consider the adoption of an ordinance to prohibit the construction of new fossil fuel filling and adoption of the ordinance to prohibit construction of new drive-through windows. These are both, I'll present both of these to Planning Commission when we do our work plan in 24-25 as recommendations by the Climate Action. These would affect zoning regulations, and so they basically start.
How many fossil fuel stations do we have? Do we know?
That's gonna.
Tom's
four.
I know of four. I know of four
In the city limits?
in the city limits, I believe. I don't believe they're all reporting into the CEC's mandatory list. I mean, it goes back and forth which ones report their sales, which they're required to do by law. I'm not sure if they all do that. My question was going to be, is there any risk of an applicant coming forward with a proposal to do either one of these things, and that would waste a bunch of staff time if it were to happen. So the question is it advisable to perhaps just shut the door on the possibility of that until we have had a chance to study and develop the ordinance?
That would require City Council to place a moratorium.
What would that take in the way of language and so on to get to City Council? Do
City
we have-
Council would have to direct that they want a moratorium, and then they would need to approve that ordinance.
Well, I'm, of course, a strong environmentalist, but I still need the gas stations for my Honda.
Do you need more than the four that we already have?
I don't see a new gas station coming in. Maybe more of the drive-through. I don't know. But we also don't have a lot of locations where we can construct anything new at this point either.
It's mostly sending signals that we're on top of this and thinking forward rather than being the last city in the county to get to this. So I believe that Petaluma has language like this that we could fairly quickly examine to see if it meets our needs and then put it on a council agenda. I guess it goes through planning commission?
The ordinance itself would go through planning commission first. They make a recommendation, and city council would then be the approval body.
So the issue, it seems to me, for these T4 and T5, for this commission, is it still sort of we're in the lead, or do we want to pass this lead to the planning commission with a recommendation for action, and possibly we could come up with some of the language to do the research for them?
So that's where I was going with putting it in the work plan. So city council has already provided the direction to move forward with these. And so then it's a matter of bringing them forward with planning commission. And so if there are specific ordinances, I don't think we need an ad hoc to do this. I think some of you have already shown interest and already have done the research. So just sharing it with staff would work.
Is there a volunteer from the commission who would take on this language requirement and identify what we'd want to propose to get over to planning commission in the way of language to move them forward?
Yes, and as we had at the, I think it was the planning commission had public comment, including from some of the folks that were instrumental in getting the ordinances passed in the other places, including the template ordinance at the Regional Climate Protection Authority. I feel confident that material's there and ready for staff to work on. So
A question.
I don't see a need for an ad hoc either.
A question. Can the natural gas facilities be modified to accept hydrogen?
We can look into that, but I
Natural
don't.
gas facilities is a pretty vague statement.
I know what he's talking about, but I don't know. And
Yeah.
it's very common in Oklahoma to see
Yeah,
the multi.
It'd be interesting.
But yeah, no, I mean,
But-
it's not prohibited.
Do we have a volunteer to move forward with the two written ordinances as a?
I'll just accept anything that anybody wants to submit. We don't
All right.
need a specific volunteer. It's okay. We can.
I would just like to know targets and timetables is kind of how I approach management, so.
Yeah.
Tom, if you're able to kind of take the lead on that, that would be greatly appreciated from the vice chair, the chair says.
Thank you, David.
So
I mean,
now-
I'm very content with the target year 2024, having that explanation. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to go into Bravo.
Okay. Bravo's the buildings. So the first one was one of the priorities, which was to encourage increased electrification and energy efficiency in residences and commercial buildings. So through education to promote energy efficiency. I think this is a key one for the Education and Outreach Committee that's still existent. That ad hoc committee is still existent, so this would be a good one for them to do, would be my recommendation. And if there's a funding need that I'm not aware of, but I think that's a good start.
That sounds excellent. I would think working with Sonoma Clean Power to understand what the value would be in greenhouse gas emissions of encouraging people to move into the Evergreen system versus the cost of an upgrade into Evergreen. There's been some complexity over some of those data that has been shared with me by our vice chair. But I'd like to have the public outreach team, which is Kendall and myself, with a public volunteer, normally Norma Fogelberg, pursue this a bit with Jeff Cyphers and the Sonoma Clean Power team to get the data clarified.
And I think it's not just that, but just in general of partnering with energy, maybe there's, I'm sorry, I'm losing my words, but energy audits, things like that are available. Or how do I do this? How do I go about this? So the information sharing aspect, and then partnering with organizations like Sonoma Clean Power to come to our community, right? Creating those opportunities for them to share their information in different formats. So I think that's kind of where that committee could also help.
Perfect.
Okay.
Any other commissioner comments on that action item?
I'll just point out that we had an opportunity to meet with Representative Petaluma's climate action team, and they have the blueprint for carbon neutrality that they've produced, and they have their table of cornerstone actions. And one of those is a date certain phased in existing building electrification strategy. It's just a planning document as I understand it at this stage, but they're talking about doing that in 2027. So ideally we would be learning a lot from them because that particular jurisdiction has deep expertise in this area. So
Excellent, thank you. We have a lot to learn from Petaluma as some of us learned from Ann Baker.
On the next one, to adopt an all-electric or electric preferred reach code. Two things on this one. The first, it is identified for this year in 2024. With that being said, I would say it's a combination of staff and a committee. The reason why I'm recommending a committee to look at this one and to look at the building aspects and a couple other building ones is that knowledge base, right? It's not my knowledge base, and I do know that there will be a need for more knowledge, but also the public outreach component of going in this direction is very necessary because people will not like this. I experienced that already. So, that being said, the starting to think about happens this year, but our new building code the state adopt their building code coming up in the next 6 months. The city then adopts it by December of 2024. So the new Cal Greens are going to be identified this year. So that's where I'm going with just staying on top of what the new rules are going to be, because I don't know what a reach is yet till we get the new Cal Green code.
that makes perfectly good sense to me. And, we are fortunate in that we do have a lot of neighboring jurisdictions that have been through this process a number of times before. But if you've not been through it, and if we as a city haven't been through it before, it's a bit of a challenge. It is probably good to note that even without a reach, the new 2024 code will be there will be more incentive to go electric, but there are complications now because the price of electricity has gotten to be so high. In fact, there's state legislation that's just been introduced that would roll back some of that previous interpretation of what the state's legislature's intent was, which is one of the things that we're seeing everybody I think is seeing in their PG bill this past month.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
So when we mention a committee there, that would be still the public engagement committee that exists, or do we need a new committee to deal with this issue?
That one would be a new one. I would recommend there be a specific committee for buildings.
Kind of buildings climate action.
Right, but around the solar, the reach for Cal Energy, those other topics that are really building focused. I would recommend there being a committee, and I'm sure Philip, who is watching right now, would be interested, obviously, in being a part of that ad hoc committee as well.
Should
with
we
his knowledge.
discuss this evening appointing that committee and include Philip HINERMAN,
Yeah.
though he's in absentia at the moment, but include
We can
him?
appoint him still.
So do you want to hold that off until we've gone through the whole list, or should we just do it now?
Let's go through the list,
All right,
because
we'll come
I
back.
have like 3 so far, because then we may come up with others, and then we can go back to
All right.
my notes on that. All right, so offer energy efficiency workshops. This goes back to B1 with just education in general. So this is a committee, and then that can be joined with, if we can find grants or other funding sources for what was in this first one, which was lighting efficiency giveaway events. Those would be perfect to be tied with efficiency workshops, right? And learning about Sonoma Clean Power or other different products or things like that around efficiency. But those are going to be tied to funding, right? We can't
Yeah.
give away
That could be
power strips
that
without
could be an
money.
ideal one to jointly between the city and the Springs in terms of grant
Right.
access, linking what I said about 30 minutes ago.
Right. I mean, I think that the service area, right, is everybody that's in the valley in what a lot of what we do. And our EV charging is for everybody in the valley. I mean, I think that's how we have to package it, right? So the deploy the local energy conservation teams and the promote the building energy. Again, those were all things that, working with the committee, I mean, staff would assist you all, but the committee would probably take the lead on all promoting and educating and advocating.
That's the buildings committee you're referring to.
I'm actually talking about the outreach.
Oh, the outreach committee. Yeah.
I'm talking about outreach on B2 and then the first one on B1, the increased energy electrification. The B1
And that
adopt
committee
all.
already exists, so we could look at that.
Yeah.
And that could be an excellent one that would link to grant applications with the Springs in one way or another.
Right.
Potentially La Luz or other partners up there.
I was not aware that electricity had become more expensive. Is that?
Check your bill.
Pardon me?
Check your latest monthly bill. Ours is through the roof.
I should be clear, it's not more expensive, it's simply more expensive than it was previously. The electricity rates have gone up significantly, and there's expected to be a new fixed charge. So just being connected to the grid is going to cost you some amount of money, and that's the piece that's in renegotiation right now.
Well, it's kind of disturbing because we're really investing in electricity. Yeah.
It's a bit of a discontinuity in state policy as I see it right now.
Well, and it's related to the changes in home roof solar with the lack of the kind of incentives we had before in the net metering side.
And there's a court case pending about that.
Okay. Let's see. B3 to expand our solar, expand education outreach and work with the Sonoma County General Services on offering free solar workshops. And then
There's a very interesting grant opportunity that I've actually discussed with Councilwoman Farrar Rivas over the possibility of significant grants to an entire city or in our case, perhaps the city and the Springs, again, to qualify more effectively, for extensive solar installation to be repaid a year later by federal funding 100%. You have to front-end it. It's an interesting option that perhaps can be looked at more aggressively.
okay. So that one would require some money.
It requires a lot of money up front. Hopefully banks might be willing, local banks and so on, to fund it with essentially a guarantee of full reimbursement from the feds within about a year. So you have to front end the money for about a year, but this can be fully repaid. It's called a direct pay system out of USDOE.
So this would be the education committee is what I would look at because we're talking about education and outreach. And then B4 is looking at the microgrids. This,
Both.
yeah, so on the microgrid also would be a grant committee would need to look at that. And then also it would be, this is where I would go in with the building again and then staff.
That's perfect. And there's some strong interest in both of B3 and B4 at Rotary as a volunteer organization to take off some of the load from our own groups.
Just quickly mention too that there's a bill that's been introduced to encourage microgrids and get around some of the barriers that have been in the way. So maybe that would be something that Buildings Committee could make some recommendations for the legislative affairs of the City Council as well.
Okay.
So that's where we are with the first segment. Any general comments from commissioners before we move on to the next major category? Seeing no hands raised.
I just wanted to say that
Go ahead, Ed.
that transportation is 90% of our emissions.
65%.
And we should call this the Transportation Commission.
Point
I mean,
taken.
all of these elements that we're talking about really give a good quality of life, but they don't really address the overwhelming carbon that we're dealing with. So I just want to think that we need to have that perspective that transportation is really the monster.
Transportation is over half of our total GHG load, but it is nowhere near 90%, Ellen. And buildings and the others all contribute in significant ways. And as we get into carbon sequestration pieces, that's another piece of the puzzle. Basically, we need action in all these categories at an appropriate speed that's accelerating.
All right, go to the solid waste. So the first one is to increase our backyard composting by offering our discounted home composters and composting workshops. I see partnerships in that one for sure, and education and outreach to implement that. Again, this is where I see the partnerships coming in with the funding and the opportunities for a source for education. So.
Currently, the trash that is picked up, everything just gets put into one thing, and then they have men that sort it all out.
Nope,
No.
everybody has their own bins.
We have 3 bins. Material properly goes into the 3 bins. And we have an agreement with Zero Waste Sonoma with respect to the organic material management.
So we are looking to increase those that home garden to compost and do more backyard gardens. Composting is what this one was about. Not necessarily, and we'll get further on, but it'll be more about around the education around composting, which I know for all of us that aren't doing it on a regular basis is hard to do. So that one, again, I said was...
There's a good
Maybe.
opportunity for partnerships here with a garden committee that's becoming increasingly aggressive in the climate action strategies. They meet at the church, I forget its name, it's the one on West Napa Street. And that garden committee is becoming increasingly active on climate issues.
So the next one is update the solid waste franchise agreement. That's a city manager. He's handling that. So that is a staff thing. And then Travis had been working on it. And now the city manager is.
So one of the things in my experience with the city's franchise agreement, we had added some new roles to it a couple of years back that included support for separation of organics at the city events, like the Tuesday farmers market night and things like that. I'm wondering if there's anything else that this commission feels needs to be added to the existing management agreement, the franchise agreement with our carrier. I know that there's been concern expressed by members of the public at this commission about single-use foodware items, and that maybe there's a need for enforcement there. I know Travis had his head wrapped around this more than I think any of us did, but we've now lost that brain trust. I also know that Zero Waste Sonoma has a program for how to report your popular restaurant that's not actually following the rules, and they come and teach them what the rules really are. Maybe that's something that we could allocate to the Education and Outreach Committee to explore and see how that could be done.
We can, it's item number 4. But it can be expanded to, so the increase the zero waste practices is something we just talked about, and then the single waste, the single use.
It's coming up next. Just before we get to that, I would note there appears to be growing interest in certain circles to explore all-electric garbage trucks with the Sonoma pickup system. So this is an ongoing discussion item amongst certain partnerships, which would deal with the transportation issue that Alan has identified.
Okay. So adopt and implement measures to reduce the generation of solid waste and increase recycling and composting. Again, this is not my field. This was Travis's for sure. He did have some items in there of like how to move forward with that in this item, but I think it's going back to what you were talking about is again partnering with Zero Waste Sonoma, getting more education out there, and learning from them about what are successful measures.
That sounds correct.
So this may be its own committee in this section.
Plastic water bottle.
See, I don't want to see that, Alan. I'll get you one like this.
That's your last one right now?
That's it. It's an evolution.
It is.
Well, I was going to get that type of thing, but then the water that they're going to give you comes in plastic. So I didn't get it.
I get it.
It's all increments, Alan. It's
It
all
is.
increments.
Okay, so sorry, number
So we got the
2.
plastic bag situation. I've noticed at Safeway in Sonoma, there's a collection point for
Yes.
plastic bags, which is fairly new, and people do seem to be using it.
I was completely full
At
this
one
weekend.
point, it was overflowing when I walked into Safeway, so
I just put it on top this weekend.
I'm afraid I have to report that I read an article, I think it was in Bloomberg, about there's a brand on that collection program, and they service the stores. Somebody put tracking RFID tags or something in the bags that were deposited, and found that some large fraction of them were still ending up in the landfill. So
Incremental. So
they used to all go to China, and then China stopped taking them, and it's stuffed up our systems.
One comment on the water bottle filling stations. This doesn't have any chlorine in it, but that would have chlorine in it. I don't like city water to drink.
I understand.
So, I mean, it's just an issue.
So, and most of those,
Maybe there could be some filtration that takes place.
maybe. I like the ones at the airport. So just going back up to the plastic bag ordinance, again, that's something that we can just take directly to council. That doesn't need planning commission. And I have plenty of examples of those. Enforce the state bag fee requirement. I'd have to look into that, of how that enforcement actually is undertaken. So those are to our staff. Increase the number of water bottle filling stations. This is a grant committee that they would as far as, because we kind of already identified where the best places are. So it's just a matter of funding and making sure that there's actually water nearby, right? So I can't extend a new water main to any place.
You know, I've played 3 seasons of bocce, and I just think it's a great game.
I've heard.
You know, if anybody wants to do that, it's the way to go.
Good to know. All right. And then require all food serviceware items used for special events to be purchased through a city contract. I think this is something that we would look to do with Lisa, who's in charge of our special events, about how we would go about implementing our own ordinances on single-use plastics, food service, and things like that. We have it in our contracts, even, for city contracts, that, we follow all these rules. It's why you don't see single-use plastic when I do my general plan stuff. You see the big plastic bottle because they don't know where else they're going to get water. But so just throwing that out there is that it's a conversation that it still needs to be had with Lisa of how we would actually implement that at events.
And does that happen through pros because of her support function at pros, or is that we can go direct with Lisa?
So it would be direct with Lisa. Pros is not involved in special events. Pros is only for Parks Rec and open space.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that used to be a major issue of the predecessor committee to this commission, to this one. The CSEC dealt a lot with events on the plaza, as some of us remember poignantly.
So again, special event discussion and enforcement are things that I need to look into. So these are staff items.
Yeah. So we have staff lead in SW4.
S4, yes. And on S2.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're on to water.
So the first two are both in blue. So the first one is to expand and modify the Cash for Turf program. This is going to be a staff project, obviously, because that was where it originated. I think we would need to look again for funding. We can't.
You know, the rainwater is, because of all the toxics in the air, the rainwater has a toxic quality to it. So it's not pure water.
Right. So the second one is to encourage the use of rainwater capture systems. But it's not going to be drinkable water. It would
It's
be
not for potable water uses.
Right.
The concept is non-potable, which is why the target is probably the Corporation Yard on A Street East, where I've begun to look at an actual proposal for costing to do a capture system there. They have a great deal of use of non-potable water there, which is not true at buildings like this one or the Depot Park Museum.
So this
That's
one I
why
would
the focus is out there on A Street East.
right. So in reuse systems at city facilities, we don't. So depending on how much capture, right, is how much you can actually utilize. But the offering the barrels to the residents, I think, is kind of a lower. If we can find the funding for something like that or a partner for funding that, I think that would probably be something that could be implemented sooner. And there'd probably be interest if people knew how to collect off their drainage systems and then use that to actually water their yards or water their garden.
Yeah, Amber, that's an area you were interested in pursuing. And the rainwater capture at A Street East would be a grant opportunity. We already have an initial design of what that might look like that I've looked at and some ideas on costing. But it then becomes a grant proposal opportunity.
And
There's a model existing in Sonoma Valley at the Flowery School, if anybody wants to swing by to see what that looks like. It's actually working pretty well out there.
okay, so that was also with the third one, the offer discounted residential rain barrels.
Yeah.
And then prepare and implement a community-based social marketing plan for water conservation. So that would be more focused on that outreach committee too.
I'm wondering if we need one more commissioner on that. We're only allowed two, I guess, under Brown. Well, once we get
You-
to 7,
yeah.
we can go to 3.
There you
Is
go.
everybody familiar here tonight with what I'm talking about?
I'll go over that.
Okay, all right, yeah. So we would, at that, once we go to 7, we could have a third body on the public outreach group.
And technically, Kendall doesn't count.
Oh, Kendall counts for me.
I meant as far as your numbers
I know.
go. So
Yeah.
you could
All
have,
right.
right now, you could have another
I
person
see.
and then have another person, and Kendall could participate
Kendall
as the
can
fourth.
participate, but not being counted as a no-no under Brown.
Correct, because she is a non-voting member.
So,
And even if she votes, and with the rule change we'll go over, even when she votes, it's still a not counted vote, so it's
Right.
not counted under Brown.
but then we'll be at 7 with a quorum of 4, and a 3 would be acceptable under Brown.
3 plus Kendall.
Yes.
But we have to get her to agree to meet with us because, or write a paper for her or something. I'm not sure what the quid pro quo would be. I'm sure she's very busy.
She gets to
with
put it on
time.
her applications to college.
Yeah.
And then encourage water conservation by high users. This is something that I'll go to. It's kind of a staff
Yeah,
needs to
I would-
understand who
we're
the
gonna
high users
identify
are.
high users by the water system
Mm-hmm.
metering in City Hall.
Right.
So that's city staff to find out who they are.
Yep. And then the advanced water metering infrastructure. So our AMI is actually being, that was at city council, at the last city council meeting. And they are moving forward with that contract for installation. So that will be happening this year because that is grant funded and that grant is expiring. So
Like 3.5 million.
it was somewhere around there. It was a lot.
Great. And I'll just point out that there's been lots of AMI installed and not necessarily that great of taking advantage of the data. But in my own experience, I had a water leak. I'm in the Valley of the Moon district. I have a notification set up to be alerted to a water leak, which is enabled by this AMI style metering system. But it went to my email, and I get too much email, and I didn't read it. And it leaked for a week, and it caused my fence to fall down. And I looked into it, and now I've set it so that it goes to my text messages so that the next leak I'll notice.
Well, we had a better experience with that. I don't know if it's AMI or what, but we were notified by city water. We're in the city that we had a leak. They came out and worked with us at the water meter area, which is in the driveway leading into the house. We ended up having to pay a significant amount to a plumber to get it fixed, but city water staff were there to help and supervise. And other than the cost, we were able to successfully deal with the leaking of water, having been notified. So that was reasonably good story, other than the cost.
And then before we move on from water, I just want to point out that this encourage water conservation by high users, there's obviously some constraints on that, the whole Prop 218 process. But I think if we're clever about the way we revisit that, we can actually fund some of these things that we might otherwise need grants for. And I have some ideas in that area too, we have to share.
All right, and then as I previously stated, all of the yellow, the government, sorry, I'm moving on. Where did it go? There it is.
These are the G categories that go on, G1 through G4.
Yeah, so all the government ones, these are all basically topics that we've already talked about as far as energy conservation, expanding our solar, expanding EV. And so again, and some of them are more focused on buildings. So this one I would recommend staff, obviously, because this is all of ours. These are CIP projects. So we would need to work with Public Works on establishing, the funds for that. But I could see where grants committee could help with that, and then also the building.
Or in the case of vehicle electrification, total cost of ownership reductions that are justified over time. I mean, but that does require
But
us
he has to have
do the
capital to
study
put up
understand.
front.
Right. But in lieu of a investment in a
Yeah.
end-of-life gas-powered vehicle.
As we go along a little further, I'd like to set up a regular reporting of those areas where staff is in the lead, so the commission hears on a quarterly basis or something, a report back from staff as a regular basis of how well you're doing, for applause from the commission.
And then
We're having a good time tonight.
And then one more thing on this electrification of the city's vehicles. There may be a little question about whose authority this is. I know Mike Berger has responsibility for the public works vehicles, but my understanding is that the city pays for the sheriff cars, which is a significant piece of our vehicle portfolio. And who is it that would be negotiating with the sheriff and looking to their plan? Is that the city manager? Is that Mike? Is that somebody else?
I'd have to look into it. My assumption would be Mike, but with Public Works, but I can look into that a little bit more.
Yeah, or maybe the police chief is actually our
Well, police chief actually is from the sheriff's department, so it would be a discussion between from the sheriff's department and somebody on city staff on what that vehicle is that gets purchased. So, my past experiences, even with the fire district, so the city that I worked for did have that as a priority of the electrification of vehicles, unless the cost of such vehicle was, I can't remember what the wordage was, and so there was an assessment done, and it was, at that time, it would be determined, okay, no, it's too expensive at this time to get a fire truck that meets the needs that could service that. The last city I was at, we ended up having like little 2-seater electric things that you could drive around on a temporary. It was just kind of like a trial to see if it worked, but we couldn't put anything anywhere to do, so it didn't work.
Yeah, my understanding is that the city of Cotati has piloted a couple of Tesla squad cars, and they're very happy with them. So
Okay. Everybody's favorite last one
Real council support here.
on carbon sequestration. Yes, goals.
On trees.
The goals are trees in all caps.
Trees in all caps.
So this is where we were talking about increasing the planting of trees, and then so that's C2. So we'll start with C1 with increasing the soil-based carbon sequestration. We already talked about increasing the use of compost in the solid waste section, so I think we've already established what that looks like.
Yep.
And then the application of biochar is just continue to look at it, see what's going on, and if people want to explore that use to we'd support that. And that's what that one was about. C2, the increase the planting of the trees. We will have on February 29th our next meeting about trees, all about trees, and go forward from that committee with some additional recommendations where we need some funding. So the assess and expand urban tree shade canopy, that was highlighted obviously in in this document, as well as that meeting, the last meeting that we had with the Joint Commissions, as well as the Pocket Forest, and then the Seeking the Tree City designation. So I think these will all come about with that joint commission in that prioritization. And
That seems to be moving rather quickly.
yes.
As I mentioned earlier, we have some CAL FIRE funding to do some limited planting at the school, at the high school. There have been some very interesting discussions about planting 7 trees, one in Sonoma somewhere, each one identified with one of our 7 sister cities, and with potential grant funding and excitement with consuls from San Francisco and so on. One of the cities, interestingly, of the 7 is Kyiv in Ukraine, so there's a fair amount of interest in that one. So that's all happening, and there's increasing interest on Green Pocket Forest at J. Carter Park, and more on that at the next commission meeting. Hopefully there's some opportunity for local individuals to actually go forward with that activity. That would take council approval to happen, but just to keep your ears open for what may be happening there.
And then this last one is establish a local carbon offset program for Sonoma. And so, I mean, the focus of this one was that it would be voluntary. And I don't know much about this. I know that I participate when I travel if the hotel or where I'm staying offers it. So I've kind of looked into them in the past, but not to any detail.
There's a growing documentation of the whole carbon offset program. There's some controversy over what is being done to offer offsets between planting trees in Brazil to other kinds of carbon sequestration. The idea was to begin to get the city looking at this before we get close to 2030, when it turns out we're not to zero. We need to look at the word net zero. And so getting started by thinking about this probably in the next year could be useful.
So something that isn't in our scope, but I think it got discussed at that joint commission, is the tree inventory and a new kind of count and what is the resource of trees that we have already. But I know that the county has just recently done a carbon stock assessment, which is a little problematic in some ways because it probably does some miscounting, but based on a bad methodology in my opinion. But I'm wondering if the city has a sense of what our carbon stock is inside the city limits. Is that something we could downscale from the county's work? Is it, the point being, if we have trees around the city and we are managing them for health and safety and all the reasons we need to trim trees in our city, do we have an ideal amount of carbon that the city can support? Are we really planning toward that? Because I don't have a good sense of that right now. I don't think we have a science base to support that in the city limits. And so it feels to me like there's a gap there, but I defer to others who know more about this than I do.
Well, there's a lot of discussion about tree inventories, what they cost, who would do them, and that would give you a lot of carbon stock associated with trees. And I think this joint commission that's been talking between the Planning Commission and PROS and this commission, are moving in that direction with bids from tree companies like Davey Tree and so on, who do offer these services at what price to move forward. There's a fair amount of either drone or satellite-based information. It's coming from up there one way or another, or maybe it's a combo of the two that's giving a fair amount of detail. And I've been doing some work with a different tree company called A Plus Tree, that for all the trees they work on, they maintain an incredible automated database with photographs, with size descriptions. I'm not sure they've turned it into carbon accounting, but they have pretty much all the data you'd need to do that. So that kind of stuff is available now, of overhead photography.
So in the interest of time, I think that something my mind is not capable of thinking about right this second, but I think that as we move forward with the canopy assessment and things like that, when we look at what can we get out of the information that we are collecting, one of the other items that was discussed that night was also the value of that tree, right? So there's information to be gathered still. And I think that as we move forward with implementation of these other things, obviously stuff is going to come up. So I just want to remember that we're with the general plan, we're looking at climate sustainability, there will be additional policies, and we will be re-looking after we do our future GHG, VMT with our land use plan, that we'll have a whole new set of data to start working from too. So my goal right now is let's do what we can right now until we actually have the other documents done and some other information so we can have more data driven.
Thank you. We're still all brainstorming tonight, but I think that's good directional.
Excuse me, but I've got an early morning medical, so I'm going to depart.
Okay. Sounds good.
We're going to wrap up very soon, Ellen, but good luck tomorrow.
Okay, so that concludes this part of it. I do recommend that you do some ad hocs. We do actually already have the education and outreach. Another member could join if they desire at this time, but we will be having 2 more members join in between now and our next meeting, which is another item that we could have a special meeting outside of the trees. But we'll talk about those meeting dates in a second. The other 2 ad hoc committees that I had recommended was a grants funding opportunities one, to look at what those are. And another one just focused on building. There's some more in the weeds aspects of the building side that I think that there could be additional assistance with. And then I'd ask, are there other ones that we had said that I am not remembering?
So what I'm following is we have one ad hoc committee in place, and as a discussion 30 or 40 minutes ago, we could add one more member now, and soon add a second member once we go from 5 to 7. And I'm not sure everybody knows the 5 to 7 here, so let's be sure that they know about that. And then there could be new ad hoc committees on grants and on buildings.
You could go ahead and form the tree one if there are certain people that want to focus on, that want to be participating in a future ad hoc that we do that's multiple. But in the meantime, just focus on our actions. That you could do that, and that those people would then participate with the other commission.
So
But I would leave that as an option.
Right. Is there interest in anyone here at the moment in joining a trees ad hoc committee? It might happen better when we're at 7 instead of 5, and especially with now too short this evening. We don't have a lot of players tonight at this point.
I enjoyed participating in that joint commission meeting and following up with review of the document that you had produced. So I think I would be happy to add myself to that list.
And we can,
Tom on the trees ad hoc.
and again, we can, the focus of the trees right now is on our list. And then when we look to move forward with the joint commission ad hocs, We're going to make recommendations for multiple because of what is going on over there.
Yeah.
Okay. So trees, building, grants, and then if anybody wants to,
And public outreach.
And public
So we're
outreach.
sort of looking at 4 ad hocs. My sense is, unless someone is willing, eager to join the public outreach group, which we've learned we could have one more now, we'd postpone this until we are up to the 7 member team.
so we won't be 7 until later. So if anybody, if we form ad hocs now, we can start working
Okay?
now.
So the idea is
as a
to
team.
form them now. Do they need 2 or 3
We could have
commissioners?
just one
Oh,
right now.
I
It's
see.
it's fine. So
It can be an official ad hoc even with 1 commissioner?
uh-huh.
I see. So let's go in order then and discuss this. Public outreach, is there a commissioner who would like to join Kendall and myself as an official appointee of that commission? We could actually have 2.
I'd be happy to join up with you guys.
Okay, so that's great. So Amber on public outreach.
And I think that committee is so important, especially now that we've articulated exactly how broad the responsibilities are, that I'm happy to join those discussions as well.
It sounds as if I've understood it right, if we have 3 of us,
Plus Kendall, it's fine.
yeah,
You're done.
we're still
Well,
okay.
actually,
Not until
not
we
yet.
have
Not
7.
until
Yeah,
not till
that's
the
what-
April. Yeah.
Right.
So Tom can at that time join.
Okay, so Tom, if you're okay to postpone your participation officially until April.
Certainly.
And you and I could have a one-on-one about that.
Well,
Well, that's
actually,
a serial committee.
let's hold off then on that, on me being
All right.
on that committee.
But we'll
For
add
the
it-
reason that we're going to have, after April, we're going to have new members as well, and they
Yeah,
may be interested
right,
and qualified.
Of course, but you'd be highly qualified for that too. But we'll add Amber now officially to the Public Outreach Committee with me and Kendall and Norma often involved. Okay? Kendall?
I had a quick question. I know it's kind of off topic, but it has to do with the public outreach. But I was wondering, like, because like I was looking at everything, and because there's so much for the public outreach, like I didn't know, like, is that ad hoc allowed to like have their own website or use the city's website or like some type of social media to kind of keep it all in one place? Because I feel like there's so many different things that it might be hard for the public to keep up with.
Right. So this group could help provide the information to update our website and to help push out messaging. We have a public information officer that handles all of our social media, and so everything would filter through her. So you guys would produce it and then provide it to us, and then we would post it.
Okay, thank you.
And the committee can come up with its recommendations, Kendall, as to how best to approach doing this with the social media adequately, getting the information out.
And staff is always here, so you guys aren't alone on this journey. So staff supports you, and then you support us. So there may be certain things where you're like, oh, we want to do this, but there's a conflict. That's my job to say, okay, well, we can't do it then, but let's look at. Okay.
Good. So we'll add Amber to that. Now, on the grants ad hoc, I would love to form a grants ad hoc, and I would volunteer to be on it since I'm in my non-commission role deeply involved in writing grant proposals of various sizes and with some success. So are there other commissioners here at the moment who would like to be on the grants ad hoc now that I know it can be a one-man show if necessary?
And there may be other people in the future.
Yeah, okay. But I'd like to start it now so that we have some rationale to really begin to pursue the grants activities.
And I can forward grant opportunities to this ad hoc
Thank you.
without jeopardizing any Brown Act requirements, right?
You can do it through me.
Or through you. Okay,
Yeah.
will do.
Perfect. The buildings ad hoc. Vice Chair Conlon, are you interested in the buildings?
I would love to work with Philip on buildings if he's still listening in. I think that the two of us have a lot of experience and energy in this area, and there's so much going on with the new code cycle coming and whatnot. So I would be honored to serve with him.
And I'd be honored to support you, but not being on that ad hoc would be just fine.
All right, sounds good.
So do we need to form those formally tonight?
Probably
or-
need a motion and second and so on. Do we still have enough of a quorum to do that?
We don't. You could appoint, the chair can appoint an ad hoc committee.
So I should do that in writing?
Nope, you just did
No, I
it.
just did it.
You
I
just
did
did
it. Oh, boy, is that easy. All right.
So just for clarification.
It's done.
Oh, not yet. You're doing really good though, because, 15 minutes. Okay, so Cinderella happens. The grants funding, I've got Morel, Education Outreach, Ward, Morel, CLEMONS, and then building, I have HINERMAN and Conlon. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And the minutes will so reflect.
Yes.
Good. I think we're close to there. Director comments and announcements. We've
Yep.
had a lot of comments already. Are there any other beyond the official agenda that you'd like to share this evening?
Yes, so just to take a step back a little bit, so we already talked about on the 29th is going to be the joint special meeting, all about trees. At that meeting, there will also be a presentation by the city manager on the goals that were identified by city council that will be ratified on February 21st. And so he'll come and present on the 29th to all three commissions about what those goals are. Trees being one of them. And so expect that presentation coming. The other item is at the last meeting, they did approve the ordinance to change the commissions. And so the commissions will now all have 7, 5 direct appointees by the city council, 2 at large, 1 at least needs to be from the valley. I think there's an at most 2 on them. So let's see what else about that. The youth member does have voting, can vote if they so choose. It doesn't count, but it's if you like to get into the practice of voting, you can. The pros youth member does voice whether they support things or not. They don't vote technically right now, but that's what they're doing. So that is an option.
And what's the timing of the commission expansion from 5 to 7?
So the ordinance goes into effect early March, since that was approved February 5th, so it'll be around March 6th. And then after that, there'll be a city council meeting in which they will appoint the next commissioners. All of the alternate commissioners will no longer be alternates, except for on planning commission. Those go away. They were all sent emails asking them if they would like to submit an application to be a full-time commissioner. So that is in place right now. The city is accepting applications to sit on all the commissions that only had 5 to go to 7, which I think is only this commission, design review, and pros and traffic.
Only,
So,
leaving everything but planning.
planning and then the arts. The arts is
I see.
already at 7. Let's see. Anything? Oh, the dates. You wanted to know the dates?
Yeah, with potential summer coming up, and I wanted to be sure we're aware of the dates, such as they are.
So they're the same time basically as last year. So we have this one right now. The next one won't be until May the 8th, and then August 14th. And then the next one will be November.
Okay, we'll try to put those 2 on our calendars and look for a November date. date as it gets closer. That's
It's-
helpful.
I can't remember what the actual date is. I'd have to look it up, but it's always the third. Are we on the third or second? Second Wednesday, third Wednesday, something along those lines. Thank you. So it'll be November 13th.
13. Okay.
That being said,
That's good.
as we have stated before, I know there was interest in increasing the number of meetings for commissions that only meet on a quarterly basis. So I would put that out there that you guys can meet more. It would be a special meeting. We would call a special meeting and post that agenda. So right now, May will be budget season. We will be actually doing the budget, presenting the budget to City Council in May, if not for approval at that point.
So if we want to propose any budget items from this commission, we would need a special meeting before May, since we're in February.
So what I was going to say is that having formed these ad hocs, we can do a lot of this deliberative work in the small groups, but I think there's a possibility that we'll need a special meeting between now and the May meeting for that very reason. So
Probably something like early April, it sounds like.
perhaps, but to be determined, and also we're going to be getting new members at the May meeting. We'll be having,
It would be the May by the time you would have your first meeting with new members.
So it's the existing membership that will deal with any budget requests in a special meeting.
I think where Vice Chair Conlon's going is that special meeting would be such that we would have new members that could increase the ad hoc committees as well.
yeah, that's kind of the question is, the appointments are going to be made by City Council
Sometime in March.
sometime in March. But the way our regular meetings, those new commission members wouldn't sit until
May.
May. So we might want to do a special meeting to welcome the new appointees and to integrate them into the conversations that have already been happening in the ad hocs. And that might be a good meeting for us also to plan to make our recommendations to the budget process this year.
So I can circulate potential calendar options,
That would be appreciated.
and then
I know I'm away
can
last
go from there.
last week of March.
Yeah, no, it would
So it'd be
probably by the time they got
early April is
appointed.
better.
By the time they got appointed and did all the paperwork and all the fun things that you guys do, it would probably be early April.
Yeah, that-
But I need to look at
So
availability
we
of
can,
space
we
and
can follow
all that
up
fun stuff.
in a couple of weeks about an early April as a target date.
Just like we did for the February.
Yeah.
All right.
All right,
That concludes my comments.
all right. And now we have Commissioner, I've lost my agenda in that sort of.
Commissioner reports and comments.
Commissioner reports is what I thought was next, yes. Are there any commissioner reports, Amber? No report? Tom?
I talked a lot tonight, I'm sorry. I do have one item. Today's Press Democrat has an article on new Highway 37 planning structures elevates focus on environment, San Pablo Baylands. And the subhead is, there is distrust among some who believe a short-term plan does more harm than good. Just for context here, we're talking about the highway across the Baylands south of us here, kind of an important roadway for access to Sonoma. The portion between our route and Highway 101, Jared Huffman and Mike Thompson have both weighed in and gotten the money, and it's going to be built higher, adequately higher for the sea level rise forecasts. However, the route between Sears Point and Mare Island is currently proposed to not actually be built. It's going to need to be replaced before 2050, most likely, under the current proposal. many of us in the environmental community consider this to be a bad idea. That we and this article in today's paper quotes Jared Huffman as saying he's pretty upset about that we should be directly a full causeway instead of a freeway widening project, which is straight out of the 1980s. That's his quote. So I just encourage people to pay attention to this issue because it's going to have a big impact on Sonoma Valley.
And it's an issue heavily driven by the lack of affordable housing, both here in Sonoma and in the case of 237, more so in Marin, where people are clustering at the end of their workday, getting back to where they can afford to live. Which, of course, even here in Little Sonoma, we see affordable housing as a climate issue. Any other comments, Amber? No? Kendall? Any commissioner comments for this evening?
Yeah, so something exciting that I have to announce is that next week I'll be planting native plants at my school. I've been working on a project that David's been talking to me about and other people in our community called Peace for Pollinators to help with the biodiversity in Sonoma.
Excellent. We're thrilled with that. And there's some local neighbors. It's a really good example of what I yatter about 10,000 actors in climate, where some local neighbors have essentially made all this happen and have mobilized the Earth Committee at the high school through Kendall and so on. So it's a great example of what's possible. My report, I would simply note a couple of things. I've been asked by Rotary to give a presentation on the work of the Climate Action Committee. That's coming up on, I believe it, I don't have my calendar fully open, I think it's 28 February at noon. If any commissioners want to be invited, I'm not in the Rotary, but I could probably wangle an invitation for a free lunch and hearing me talk about some of the stuff we talked about tonight in an organized manner. There's some possibility of a morning Rotary presentation as well, at least one member of that. That's not scheduled yet, but they're kind of jealous that the lunch group went ahead, so the morning group wants a similar presentation. And I would just note that from the partnership perspective, the Sonoma Ecology Center is proceeding with 2 or 3 major new proposals due early March to CAL FIRE, which would involve a particular focus on fire risk reduction using low emissions technologies and training a workforce of highly disadvantaged people, beginning with La Luz, and then 3 subcontractors to give you an idea of what's feasible in this sort of climate and forest area. This is Conservation Corps North Bay, a group called Circuit Rider, and a group called North Bay Jobs for Justice. Those would be the 3 subcontractors to the Ecology Center on a major workforce training project. So that proposal is coming along nicely and would go in early March. So that's my sort of update on things happening outside of the Climate Action Commission.
And where would that work take place?
That's focused initially in Sonoma Valley with La Luz, using the EPA funding primarily, and then triggering in Sonoma County with those 3 organizations over 3 years, about 250 to 300 people trained. This includes full hourly pay while they're being trained and so on, and assistance in doing essentially smart forest fire risk reduction activities. And the model then would be taken further in a subsequent basis, potentially statewide, and there are even discussions now underway, California, Washington, and Oregon, in a 3-part one focused there on veterans. At this point, the meeting is adjourned.